Hi, good evening. My name is Richard Urban, and I'm your host tonight, coming to you from historic Harpers Ferry, West Virginia. This evening's installment of the Richard Urban Show. And this evening, we're going to be talking about vaccines in West Virginia and vaccine choice and what is in vaccines. First, I'd like to start with our scripture reading, which is the reading for this series, and it is 1 Corinthians 3:16. All of you surely know that you are God's temple and that his spirit lives in you. Together you are God's holy temple, and God will destroy anyone who destroys his temple. So tonight we're going to be looking again at the issue of vaccine choice in West Virginia. And I'd like to point out some news. First of all, there's been a bill introduced in the West Virginia House, and that bill has introduced vaccine choice. So if you're in West Virginia, you should call your this health committee, and I'll put the number up on the screen, and urge them to take up that bill in the House. And also, I want to invite you to West Virginia Health Freedom Day, which is coming up Monday, January 15th. And I will be there with our nonprofit Urban Life Training, and we will be rallying for and learning about the importance of vaccine choice. And I'd like to look at some of the different vaccines and whether they're really necessary tonight. But before I get into that, I want to get more into the philosophic reasons for vaccine choice. And I think one of the biggest ones is the one expressed in our scripture, in the scripture, I should say, tonight. And that is that you are God's temple. I am a sovereign, of God's kingdom. And the state of West Virginia does not tell me like what I'm going to inject into my body or my kid's body. That's completely wrong. We are God's children, and it is our sovereign right to, have sovereignty over ourselves and our beings. So I thought it was really, it is somewhat shocking. For instance, you can see in this clip how last year at the Senate Education Committee, West Virginia Senate, Dr. Sherry Young basically, showed disdain for the fact that people would have religious exemptions. She basically said, no one has a religious exemption. No organized religions against vaccines.
Any entire religious groups that are exempt
There are no.
from
Sorry.
from vaccinations?
There are no defined religious organizations against.
But
religious.
exempt.
No.
Okay, and I might be wrong on this. Just according to the College of Physicians of Philadelphia, the Christian Scientists aren't forced to have vaccinations. Is that true?
I'm not aware of that.
Could that be true?
It could be true, yes.
Okay. The right of conscience, that's a fundamental American principle, right?
I would agree.
Right. So if America was founded on right of conscience, certainly the right of the parent to say yes or no would be protected there, wouldn't it?
I would agree.
Okay. And that's all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'm a member of the World Peace and Unification Sanctuary, and although there might not be a particular church rule, there is a particular rule about the sanctity of your body and putting vaccines in. So there might not be a particular rule in a church or other churches saying, do not take, this vaccine. But there is a rule about the sanctity of your body. And some people also are concerned about, of course, the aborted fetuses within cells rather in the vaccines, and that's certainly a legitimate concern. And also just putting foreign substances into your body, what right does the state have to do that? And so secondly, I want to point out that's a philosophical reason. You are God's temple, and it is a basic tenet of the U.S. Constitution that Congress shall make no law regarding the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So your religious convictions, your convictions in general, are sovereign in this United States. And last time I checked, West Virginia was the United States, I think. The second thing I want to mention is do no harm. So I thought doctors are supposed to do no harm. So I find it pretty amazing in this clip that I'm going to show right now what Dr. Sherry Young says, who represents the West Virginia Association of Physicians, Pediatric Physicians. Sorry, that's not the exact name, but that's what she represents. And so here's what she has to say.
Okay, and how about Gardasil? Should that be required?
It's not currently, to my understanding,
I know it's not
required.
now, but should...
It is a recommended vaccine through the American Academy of Pediatrics as well as the Council for Immunization
I'm just
Practices.
asking for your opinion, though. Should it be required?
I believe it's a highly effective vaccine, and I support it, and I actually was young enough when it came out that I personally received it. I'm a younger physician, so I personally got the vaccine right under the cup before I was 26, so I personally took it and believe it.
You haven't, but again, should it be, I mean, just straight up, should it be required?
I believe it. If we're trying to get the strongest immunization practices we could, if that's your question, then yes.
Okay. Do you have a pretty good knowledge, you think, of what's inside of the vaccines, what they're made of, how they're cultured, and so on? I know one of the concerns people have is related to mercury, for example. Do we use mercury in vaccines?
So I will preface this by saying I'm a physician. I'm not a vaccine developer. I don't work for the companies. But they have gone through rigorous trial over and over again to prove their safety, and we have removed some of the concerning products in the past that may have been there, but they have been proven time and time again to be effective. So there could probably be somebody else that could better speak to that because I'm not involved in the development of them. But just like when I prescribe different medicines, I believe that they are safe and they have gone through the rigorous trial, and I trust that process.
Okay. Well, related to that particular thought, it's my understanding, and I could certainly be corrected. We may have some experts back here in the room, and in this case, I'll even cast a wider net that the vaccines do not go through the normal FDA verification process. So, for example, Viagra had way more extensive testing done on it than the chickenpox vaccination.
I would defer that to someone who perhaps is more
Not something you're
experienced
aware
in the development of vaccine. From what we know, that they go through a rigorous process and they are safe and effective.
But you don't know what that process is?
I have not personally witnessed that process.
I know the senator from Harrison a little while ago sort of joked about, I think it was the senator from Harrison, global warming debate. So, bringing that debate in just slightly, there's always this point made that, well, everybody universally agrees that global warming really happens or whatever. And yet when we talk about vaccinations, we would have a similar universality amongst physicians or medical practitioners, but you don't understand the background data behind what went into testing that vaccination. You don't necessarily understand what chemicals may or may not be in the vaccination. You would have people required to take vaccinations for diseases that are communicable, but communicable based entirely on behavioral activity as opposed to something like a flu where you can catch it one neighbor to another. Gardasil is a vaccination that is very directly caused by certain behavior, but you would also require that vaccination. I just wonder, it seems like there's an awful lot of people that do support in the medical community, vaccinations. I hear a lot about all the various cases they've seen of people dying and so on. It seems actually very limited in that regard, and it seems like it's more of it's almost like a herd immunity thing. You guys are all immune to the counter arguments because you've just built up an immunity level to the counter arguments as opposed to knowing why you believe what you believe.
So you can see in that clip how she doesn't even know what's in vaccines and vouches for them and even wants us to take the HPV vaccine, which isn't yet mandatory in most places except DC and Virginia. But she would make it mandatory, and yet she's a doctor who I thought was supposed to do no harm, but she doesn't even know what's in the vaccines. That doesn't make any sense. In fact, it's wrong. It's very wrong. The third thing I want to point out philosophically before we get into our analysis of the vaccines that are on the West Virginia schedule is that there's huge conflicts of interest. You have people like Paul Offit who make huge monies, who actually makes money off of vaccine patents or whatever. And then he says, oh, vaccines are safe and effective, of course. I wouldn't be biased. And then you have all these medical people like this lady and, this physician association lady. Oh, no, of course, we don't have any financial interest. That's not true. Any doctor who has a practice is making money off of vaccines directly or indirectly. Don't people come in multiple times to get vaccines? Like a dozen plus times, more than a dozen times? What the heck? A bunch of times to get the vaccines. They don't make any money off of the visits? Of course they make money off the visits. It's a direct conflict of interest. And in fact, drug companies have even paid, were in the habit of paying pharmacists, at least until recently, maybe they still do, to use certain drugs. Not sure if that applies to vaccines, but the point is there are huge conflicts of interest. And especially when drug companies are doing the supposed safety studies, and vaccines aren't even held to the same standards as drugs. So, yes, we are sovereign citizens here in West Virginia, and certainly we're going to exercise our rights. And we really demand that our legislators in the Senate and the House pass vaccine exemptions. It's the least they could do. So let's start looking at the schedule. Here's the schedule for West Virginia for vaccinations. We'll start with the ones that are supposed to be due before a child enters school. Here's a recommended schedule. So today we're going to talk about hepatitis B, DTaP, that's diphtheria, tetanus, and acellular pertussis, and HIB vaccine, which is Haemophilus influenza type B. Okay, so let's look at Hep B. So for Hep B vaccine, first of all, Hep B shouldn't be in the schedule at all. Hep B is a sexually transmitted disease. Do you know? Let's see. The first shot is at 2 to 3 months, and then you're supposed to get it no less than 5 times. And remember, you're getting multiple vaccines, perhaps around 4 at one visit. Well, let's look at the statistics for hepatitis B. And I also want to make a point that yes, it is important if a mother has hepatitis B, that could be dangerous for a child, and the child could get it and could die. But it's easy to test a mother for Hep B, so why would you make every little baby get a Hep B vaccine? And also, yeah, that's the main point. Secondly, the little baby's not going to get hepatitis B. It's a sexually transmitted disease, only possibly from the mother, but the mother can easily be tested. So there isn't any justification for having a vaccine that's for sexually transmitted disease on the schedule like that. So according to the vaccine injury database, or so-called VAERS, there were 54,803 serious reactions to the hepatitis B vaccine since reporting started in 1990. And, total reactions, 33,487 serious ones through November 17th, 2017, 37 in West Virginia, which is a relatively smaller state. 858 people died from the vaccine, not from Hep B, from the vaccine. And 4 people died in West Virginia. And serious reactions may include permanent paralysis. Of course, death is a serious reaction. And this is not a necessary vaccine. So, why are we requiring it? No sexually transmitted disease vaccine should be required. That includes hepatitis B and HPV. So that's an unnecessary vaccine that kids are supposed to get. Wow. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, I'm sorry. I see. 3 doses and right, 3 doses. Okay. Now let's look at the next one on the schedule. Diphtheria, tetanus, and acellular pertussis. Okay. So when we look at the stats for that vaccine, then there were 26,294 serious reactions. Serious reaction means not just a little rash. It means people were hospitalized, or they're dead, or permanently injured, such as paralyzed. 675 people died nationally. And in fact, one of those people seriously injured was the lady who started the National Vaccine Information Center, Barbara Lowe Fisher. And in West Virginia, there are 23 serious reactions and 3 deaths. These vaccines are all together. They're not available separately in the United States. Diphtheria was primarily a disease that was caused by poor sanitation, and the rates had gone down some 90+% before vaccine was introduced. So it's virtually an unknown disease in the Western world. It's an unnecessary vaccine. And when you consider that 675 people died from the vaccine, and virtually no one, the disease is practically non-existent in the modern world, which has things like toilets and sanitation, so people aren't exposed to sewage and things like that. This is an unnecessary vaccine. Tetanus, also similar. There was danger, for instance, from people stepping in horse dung, things like that. It's not necessary in the modern era, and also there are serums that you can now take that used to not be available. I say pertussis. Pertussis is a particularly interesting case. There have been numerous studies that say and show that although they're giving more and more pertussis vaccine, it appears that people are getting it later and later, and that, in the population that didn't used to get it, in other words, the vaccine is causing changes in the way pertussis is is multiplying. And so also pertussis is generally not, it can be life-threatening in some cases, but generally, it's not seriously life-threatening, and it's not really a necessary vaccine either, when you consider that there's been 675 deaths nationally and 26,294 serious reactions, including requiring hospitalization. That's a lot of reactions. And remember that diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis is all together. So tetanus is another one that's very, very rare. It is a serious illness, but again, with modern sanitation, the removal of things, of horses from cities, things like that, there's little chance of, virtually no chance of getting it, but yet more people are dying from the vaccine. So this also makes no sense. So that's a rundown of 3 of the vaccines, of the some 8 vaccines, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 vaccines that are required in West Virginia. And of course, multiple doses. So, yeah, so I think we really need to, rethink this whole issue. So I urge you in West Virginia, but also other states, to really be aware, because there's a push from the vaccine industry to try to get more and more vaccines implemented, including the HPV vaccine and more and more vaccines. So I'd also like to point out that in Pennsylvania, a bill has been introduced by not in Pennsylvania, but by the congressman from Pennsylvania to repeal the 1986 Vaccine Act that makes the pharmaceutical companies immune to prosecution for vaccine injuries. Since then, the number of vaccines and the number of cases has skyrocketed. That's why there's this injury fund, but that's paid by the government and absolves the industry of liability. This is a very bad idea. And as you see, the number of vaccines and the types have skyrocketed since then. So this idea that vaccines are safe and effective, as you saw in that clip from the lady from West Virginia, who's also apparently an officer in the National Association of the Pediatricians that she's a member of, you see that she doesn't even know why vaccines are dangerous, but has bought the argument she learned, I guess, in med school, or didn't learn, I guess, and she doesn't know what's dangerous about vaccines, that, they're safe and effective. It's like a religion. Only the people who have a problem with religion aren't people who want religious exemptions, but the people promoting the vaccines. They have the problem with religion. It's called the religion of vaccines are safe and effective. Vaccines are safe and effective. Vaccines are safe. Hey, if I repeat it often enough, I'll believe it. So this is crazy, and they're harming people. People are dying. People are being maimed. And then the vaccines have been falsely promoted even since the smallpox vaccine came out as helping to reduce these diseases, when if they provided any help, it was extremely nominal, and the disease was eliminated by things like better sanitation, or new diseases were brought in that they simply renamed. And we'll talk about that when we're talking about some of the other vaccines like measles or polio. So I think, we really, or not think, I know that we really need to exert our rights, that it's unconscionable. And for those like here in West Virginia, we have strong Second Amendment rights, but yet, as I mentioned last time, we don't have the right to even decide what's injected into our bodies. So for instance, if you're going to college or in certain perhaps hospitals and stuff, you might have to take a vaccine. And also another bill has been introduced by the same congressman in Pennsylvania that people have to be informed before they get vaccines. So instead of just telling people, oh yeah, it's time for the vaccine, they say, oh, okay, and get it, they need to know the side effects. I mean, how many people would have gotten the HPV vaccine, even though it's not mandated in most places, if they would have realized, that there's been 308 people have died already from that, and thousands of serious adverse reactions, including paralysis. So if someone tells you, well, you might get paralyzed, your child, you're going to think twice about that. So that's also a very good bill. So we need to push back against these vaccine manufacturers and this lie and this false religion and mantra of vaccines are safe and effective when they're not often effective and they're not often safe. And some would argue they're never very effective and never safe. And certainly any honest doctor will tell you that a lot of things about how vaccines work isn't even known, and about how immunology works, I should say, how your immune system fights off diseases. So let's make sure that we absolutely are fighting for vaccine choice, and also that we are exerting our rights as sovereigns with rights given by God, not by the state of West Virginia or the communicable disease centers or any other state or person. And no one can force us to insert foreign substances into our body that may lead to death. Wrong. That's completely wrong. So this is the year of vaccine choice. I predict it will be rolled back in West Virginia and Mississippi, leaving only crazy California. And hopefully that will be rolled back soon. So let's work for that. I am your host, Richard Urban, reporting to you as a sovereign here from the state of West Virginia in historic Harpers Ferry. Do be blessed. Do have a good night, and see you on Monday, January 15th, for West Virginia's Health Freedom Day at the state capitol in Charleston. Do be blessed. Good night.